back to my channel. My name is Payton, and today I am reacting to Middle Ground's episode of Mormons versus Ex-Mormons. This is part 2 of the video, since this is a really long one. So if you haven't seen part 1 yet, click on the link in the description and go see that one first, and then come back to this one. Let's go. Okay, next prompt is, it's okay for the doctrine to change. I think this one is definitely up for like interpretation on the question, because when it says, is it okay for doctrine to change, does it mean like, does the church teach that doctrine can change and that's fine? Or is it just that in general, should it or should it not be okay for doctrine to change, in your opinion? Like, is it what the church teaches or what your opinion is? If it's opinion, that's still really hard for me, because there are doctrines that I completely disagree with, that the church has changed its stance on. For example, for a long time, black people couldn't have the priesthood in the church, black men, because, you know, women can't do that. And you know, there's a lot of racism in the church's history. I can 100% agree with that. You know, people could be products of their environment, and you know, the church could have been teaching something that culturally was accepted at the time because it allowed everybody to stay comfortable or whatever. Even though I disagree, it makes sense. However, that would mean that you have to be able to say that the prophets at the time, which would have been Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, are men and are susceptible to making mistakes, and if they, you know, can talk to God and give information to the world and the church's followers that is from God, that they can also give you information that is just from them speaking as a man and being human. And if you're going to say that, then you have to say that also our current prophet can do that they can teach things that are from the mouth of God, and that they can also teach things that are from their own mind and heart, which is not taught. So there's that. And something that I would like to see change is, like, I think one day people who are part of the LGBTQ plus community should be able to marry in the temple and do those things. So I think just the fact that those things are called doctrine to begin with is something that's supposed to be unchanging. It can be harmful for people who were living in a certain lifestyle and were harmed for a really long time, and then the church all of a sudden says, you know, this is actually okay with God now, and you can do these things. That's got to be really painful. And so I don't know, I don't even know how I would interpret the question. I think maybe I would step forward. I think I would say that it is okay for the doctrine to change, but it should be taught that doctrine can change. It should be taught that the prophet can speak for God, and that he can also speak as a man, and that you need to take everything with a grain of salt, and that just because the prophet is saying something doesn't always mean that it's from God, and that it's 100% right and accurate, and that you can use your own ability to pray and have your own relationship with God that allows you to decide whether something is right or not, and not have, you know, this cultural stigma within the church where if you're doing something that the prophet tells you not to do, that you could say, I didn't feel that was right, I didn't feel that was of God, and not have, you know, everybody upset at you about it, because, you know, what the prophet says is what God says, and in most people's minds. So I think that's kind of how I would interpret that. Sorry, that was really long and winded. I just think it's a kind of a vague question.
It's okay for the doctrine to change.
There's scriptural precedent for it changing, and one of the most beautiful aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the fact that we have and rely upon modern prophets, and we take what they say seriously and look forward to that prophetic revelation. But at the end of the day, we still have to go home and get that same revelation. We have to get that same answer from God directly from him that dovetails with that revelation, so that we know in our core that that is what God wants for his children. We don't have a static God.
I disagree there, because God is unchangeable, as it states in the scriptures. There are eternal principles that are eternal. They never change. but how those principles are applied can change over time. But the eternal principles remain the same, period. If we don't have any objective, solid, eternal truth, then everything is relative, and relativity leads to chaos.
We're talking about understanding God and eternal principles. I mean, we're talking about cosmic law, multi-dimensions, everything so expansive. And all of that information, part of it is being channeled through the mind of fallible people who are writing things down in a fallible language, being interpreted to people with fallible understanding.
Modern times, you need modern measures. So it's useful that we have prophets on this earth to this day, because everything is ever changing. I mean, look at our language and look at the way it used to be, look how it is now. It's just, everybody needs an updated interpretation.
One of my favorite things about the Mormon Church is how much has changed. And I can think about 3 issues that really troubled me when I was an Orthodox devout member. One was when I went through the temple for the first time and I had to slit my throat as part of, and to use my thumb as a sign to slit my throat as part of a covenant I was making in the temple. I was super glad when I found out they took that out in 1990. The second was, I'm old enough to remember when Black Mormons were not allowed to hold the priesthood, they were not allowed to hold certain offices in the church, and when they were kept out of the temple with just basic temple blessings. And I was super happy in 1978 when they allowed Black people to be members in full standing. The final one, my grandmother was the daughter of a third wife, so I come directly from a polygamous ancestry. And it wasn't until I was 30 or 31 that I found out that the founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, married over 30 women, 14-year-olds, other men's wives. That information was withheld from me for 30 years. And I was super happy that over time the church has distanced itself from polygamy, because I think it's one of the most horrendous teachings that the church has ever had. So I'm super grateful the church changes, and it does.
I have to push back, because I think there's some things that are misconstrued as doctrine that are policies, and we see that as the church changing.
Which thing that I just said was a misconstrued?
Blacks not receiving the priesthood.
Isn't that just a fact?
Well, no, but you're saying it was a doctrine that changed.
Well, the first presidency, the prophet and the first and second counselor prior to 1978, on multiple occasions signed statements saying that it was doctrine that Black people could not be members in full standing. That's the first presidency in the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah, but that was a corruption of Joseph Smith baptized free men. He had a presidential platform based upon abolition. The Mormon Church was basically an abolitionist entity that the government feared in the West for its first 50 years. The fact that it adopted some bad ideas of the curse of Cain because of Protestant influence coming from the South, especially when Parley P. Pratt returned
Just blaming another religion.
as a missionary from the South, and the pressures put on Brigham Young as a governor of the state of Deseret, that is an abuse of history.
But it's your prophets, the people that you believe claim spoke to God and that I used to believe, they're the ones signing these statements. It's David O. McKay. It's people that you sustain as prophets, seers, and revelators. So how do you know when they're speaking as a man? How do you when they're excluding an entire race of people from full participation? How do you know they're speaking for God or speaking for themselves? Until the social.
I answered that right at the beginning of this whole entire prompt. It's a 2-part path. You receive revelation from a prophet, you go home, you pray about it, you confirm it. Like, I actually really appreciate this question because it gets to the root of epistemology.
Should we let Kwaku answer this?
I think the human ego speaks when we want our environment and the bubble we're in, because everyone lives in a bubble. We don't want that bubble to change, no matter what. Human beings are prideful. Human beings have ego. Everyone does. I look at some of the things our church leaders said, David O. McKay, right? Brigham Young, Joseph Fielding Smith. I know they weren't, singing Kumbaya with Black people. I get that. I totally get that. But at the same time, I understand that people are also products of their environment. And I don't want to condemn someone who's not here to defend themselves. And in the same way, 100 years from now, someone will look at us and they'll say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you guys were using your Cobalt iPhones built by child slaves. Please don't deny my humanity 100 years from now.
Well, look at a New Testament example, Peter. Peter was the leading apostle during the time of the original apostles, right? And he was making Gentile converts get circumcised. And Paul confronts him to the face, saying that this isn't necessary. So you have disagreement within the apostleship. And so...
But doesn't the Book of Mormon say that God cursed white people with dark skin for their wickedness? Isn't that in your scriptural canon?
It depends on your interpretation.
I've never read it that way.
What's your interpretation?
Well, there's scriptures in the Old Testament where certain individuals say there's a skin of blackness upon me that is totally symbolic of being in a state of distress or...
Solomon, I am black, become Leo.
Yeah.
So what did God do to the Lamanites in the Book of Mormon in your interpretation? Did he not turn their skin dark because of their wickedness? Even though the book says that?
No, I think it was a spiritual mark, just like with Cain.
Okay, so this says, wherefore, as they were white and exceedingly fair and delightsome, that they might not be enticing unto my people, the Lord God did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them. And it's covered, but that's in Nephi or 2nd Nephi in the Book of Mormon. I even had children's version of the Book of Mormon when I was a kid. There was an LDS author who rewrote the stories into like ways that children could understand and put pictures on there and everything. And I'm pretty sure you were able to get these books from like Deseret Book and just the church's stores and websites. And I remember learning about them talking about, you know, how these people were white, had white skin prior, and that God cursed them with black skin for, you know, sinning and making all these bad decisions. And it had drawings in the book of them having white skin and then them having black skin, and they were sad, and it said that they would be like loathsome by the people. Basically them having the dark skin would make people hate them, and that that its reason was so that you could visually see the difference between people who were of God and were righteous and people who are not, and people who sinned, and that you could just look at them and you knew that that was a bad person. So that's how it was taught to me as a kid. I was told that that was like no longer a thing, and that had happened so long ago, and that, you know, all the people that this happened to, you know, aren't alive anymore, and all of this stuff. And just because that somebody has black skin doesn't mean that they're bad, but it did mean that they were descendants of bad people. So that is how it was taught to me. I'm not going to speak for how it was taught for everybody else and how other people interpreted it. If you were taught in a different way, you can go ahead and leave that in the comments. But that is how it was taught to me as a child. So, and obviously that's horrible and disgusting. So.
We don't
But it
know.
says skin of blackness in the Book of Mormon. It says
Yes,
skin of blackness.
it's an idiom. There are many idioms that are mistranslated.
Doesn't that feel convenient to call it an idiom?
No,
when it says skin of blackness.
Because you need to.
And when it talks about their dark skin, that God made them dark so that they'll be loathsome to the white skin.
It's not,
Nephites?
because if you're a biblical and Greek scholar, you realize there are idioms like this one, which is well known in ancient scripture as being a symbol of being a distress.
As a dark, can I speak? I've never read it that way. The Book of Mormon is by and large about Native Americans, and whenever we bring up the subject of race, suddenly it turns into Europeans being switched into sub-Saharan Africans. But that's not what the book is saying. When I read the Book of Mormon, I'm seeing Nephi, which is where this comes from, the cursing. Nephi hates the Lamanites. He's finding every single way to dislike them. And then his brother Jacob comes and says, hey, you should not hate them because they're darker than you. And then Samuel the Lamanite, the dark prophet, is speaking to the white Nephites. And he's saying, hey, no, you're actually cursed. And they say, let's remove him from the record. And Jesus comes in and says, put him back in the record. It's showing a history of prejudice and how to overcome it.
So what does skin of blackness mean in the Book of Mormon?
Yeah. Nephi may very well believe that. Jacob doesn't. That doesn't mean it's prescriptive. That means it's descriptive.
Okay, so you're saying
To Kill a Mockingbird is racist.
You're saying
but it's
Nephi
not racist.
was racist, but not God.
I'm saying possibly.
Okay,
I mean,
that's
yeah,
cool.
it's
That's cool.
it's effectively
That's cool.
diaries, right?
That's cool.
Prompt wasn't whether the doctrine can change. It was, is it okay for the doctrine to change? And I feel like that puts the church into a very precarious situation, especially going back to our last discussion when you said something that's still kind of in my head, the doctrine, the abuse of the doctrine of eternal family. Can the doctrine of eternal family, is it okay for the doctrine of eternal family to change within the LDS church?
Is it okay? Again, I would just say, well, I guess define okay. Is there a scriptural precedent for it? And it could. Yes, absolutely. If a prophet were to come out and say, I've received a revelation from God, and X is going to change, and then, you know, he announces it in general conference, and I go home and pray about it, Timber goes home and pray about it, we realize, okay, cool, this is a revelation from God, it's changing.
What about the families that lost so many sons and daughters to suicide because of that never-changing doctrine of specific eternal families? You cannot go to the Celestial Kingdom because you believe in this. We'll be able to visit you every now and again. We'll have a little family reunion, that kind of thing, but you just can't come in and visit us up there. If that changes, the LDS church is, I mean, they tried to do a little change-a-roo in 2015 where they were like, you know, children of, you know, same-sex households can't get baptized. And that was changed real quick.
Again,
and my
that's a
parents,
policy.
and my parents, but we're talking about
Would you want me to answer the question?
lives.
Or,
Yeah,
okay.
oh, definitely.
So, first off, individually, just man to man, friend to friend. Well, hopefully we'll become friends. If somebody actually said that to you, what you just articulated right there, that is not Christ's doctrine applied through Christ-like love. There's 3 or 4 things that are wrong with what has happened to you guys if you guys are indeed regurgitating the story the way it happens, and I believe you. So on the individual level, I want to say, I see you, I validate what you've gone through, and my first initial reaction would be first to very quickly delineate between the church with a little c and a church with a big C. I will tell you the church with a big C and its codified doctrines is loving to all, gives an eternal, immeasurable value to every soul, and views you first as a child of God, not as a gay man, not as an ex-husband to a woman or a current husband to a man. It sees you as who you are. With that said, we all have really cringy, awkward friends who've said incorrect, sometimes maybe even cruel things to LGBTQ members, justified by false conceptions of God or misinterpretations of doctrine. And their bigotry they have tried to couch in religious writ or religious culture, and that is wrong simultaneously.
There wasn't anything that they said that was like, oh, my friends said this to me, or whatever. It's the church. It's prophets, it's seers, it's revelators, it's people who are getting up and speaking from the pulpit, it's talks that get put out, it's lessons that are taught in church, it's in the handbooks. That's what they're talking about. They're not saying what their friends said to them.
If we're talking about, is it okay that doctrine changes? Yes, there's a completely, totally codified runway for how doctrine can change in our church, and it is okay for us as members because there's a mechanism for recognizing that as the revelation.
I think it's safe for the LDS church to delineate between policy and doctrine, because if they change certain things that they've deemed doctrine, they're...
I think the problem is it keeps changing. And what happens is the prophet will say something, and then he says, this is God's word, and he does something like how youth couldn't get baptized if they were the children of queer parents, but then it swaps.
He did say when he said this is doctrine, this
he did.
came from God.
And then it swapped back. So the problem that I have is that it's not that policies or things can change, it's the fact that we're constantly attributing things to God.
Yes.
And then when it changes again, we're like, oh, it was policy. Oh, it's a fallacy of man.
What kills me is, like, I was taught that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so on one hand, I feel like doctrine shouldn't change. And when we do see the changes happening, a lot of the time it's because of social media, it's because of headlines, it's because of the church trying to become more acceptable in society.
More transparent.
So with doctrine like polygamy was once practiced. Now it's like an LDS thing, but it was once practiced by the mainstream church. Now it's been disavowed. We no longer do polygamy.
Well,
and yet,
technically, it still is practiced
in heaven.
Yeah. So to clear that up for anybody who doesn't understand, the mainstream LDS Mormon Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, whatever you want to call it, does not practice polygamy on earth anymore. If you don't know what polygamy is, it's when one man has multiple wives, and that the church initially started that way, and it was like that for a long time, and then it ended. There was a branch off in the church that's now called FLDS. They still practice polygamy, and the mainstream LDS Mormon Church continued on without practicing polygamy on earth. It is still practiced in heaven. So it is taught like when, say, there's a man and a woman, and the woman in the marriage dies. So the man is now single because his wife died. He can go off and find another woman and get married and sealed in the temple, and say she dies again, or whatever, or divorce, and you keep your sealing and go off, find another woman, get married. So on earth it is practiced that you only have one. We're supposed to obey the laws of the land, so I'm sure that that's a part of it. But basically what that would mean is that when the man dies and he's up in heaven, he has all three wives still. He has every wife that he was sealed to on earth, he has all of them in heaven. So he lives in his great big mansion, and he's got all of his wives and all of his kids that he had with any of the wives, and so in a sense that's still practiced that way. Man and woman married. If the man dies before the woman can be sealed within the temple again to another man, she must completely abolish her sealing to the other men in the church. So because a woman cannot be sealed to multiple men and go up into heaven and live in her mansion with a bunch of men, but men can live in their mansions with a bunch of women. So it is still practiced in heaven.
In heaven, polygamy will be practiced. It's the law of heaven, polygamy. And so I feel like it's been disavowed here on earth to appease society, and yet in heaven.
So to summarize, you're essentially saying that whenever there's social pressure that changes it,
Yes.
it gets
I don't think
put
it's-
into policy.
I don't think
This
so.
just
Yeah.
sounds not to be a jerk, but this just sounds like, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful, but it sounds like you're just having a gripe. Yes, you can be frustrated that things have changed back and forth, but it is good for organizations to change for the better. I don't understand how anyone could say it's wrong for doctrine to change.
So I came out in the prompt because I'm grateful that the church has made these changes. The problem is that they don't own up to the mistakes they've made. They've never apologized to black people for excluding them for over a century. The problem is that when the church teaches something as doctrine to all its members, and it leads to carnage, whether it's LGBTQ deaths, destruction of families, systemic racism for over 150 years, the church never owns up and apologizes and says, hey, sorry black people, we excluded you for 150 years. Sorry parents of LGBT and siblings of LGBTQ youth. Sorry that your kids died. The church just says, that was just policy. That they were all speaking as men, but then they turn around and say, but if the prophet's speaking now, you have to obey the prophet. You have to follow the prophet. So the church never atones. It never does what it asks the members to do.
I'm saying this with as much grace as I can muster. Our beloved prophet, Russell M. Nelson, he is nearly 100. I'm not kidding. 99. He's 99. And he is running a global organization. When he was going into college, the prophet of our church at his time was still a polygamist. Right? I mean, we're talking about old people that he was born before the television, the former Queen of England, and Martin Luther King, and has outlived two of those three things, okay? So, again, give him grace. These people are doing the best.
But then what's the value of a prophet?
Do you believe he talks to God?
The value of a prophet is look at the people.
But he talks directly to God.
Sometimes face to face, maybe. I don't know.
But God tells him the truths that he needs to know for the world today is what you believe.
We're talking about a beautiful cosmic entity that is Heavenly Father trying to channel information through a 99-year-old man in Salt Lake City.
But he does, yes?
Oh, yeah, to you as well.
Yeah, but it gets to...
So am I a prophet?
I don't know, are you?
This guy seems like he's gonna be convinced out of the church at some point, and I don't mean any hate or disrespect, because I was convinced out of the church and I never thought that would be possible whatsoever. But he's definitely progressive enough and understanding enough and has enough of an open mind while still holding on to that faith big time. We might see something happen there. Just saying. If he does, I'll be watching that Mormon Stories episode.
The Mormon Church has done good in the world.
Okay, the Mormon Church has done good in the world. I would absolutely step forward, done countless amazing things. Like I grew up constantly, serving communities and surrounded by wards and stakes and groups of people who, full of members of the church who are constantly trying to find service to do and find good things to do and are trying to help people. On the contrary, I think they've done a lot of harm. I think they have so much that they could do even more good, and I hate when people say stuff like that, because there's, I hate when people give crap to like celebrities, for example, like, oh, they have so much money, like why don't they just give it all away? And I hate that. But at the same time, when you're like a multi-billion-dollar industry, and like when I couldn't put food on my family's table and my husband lost his job and we had nothing, basically there, and mind you, we're like door dashing, trying to get money to, stay in our house and keep our lights on. And, the best thing that they can do for help and assistance in that is like, if we take 10% of the money we make door dashing and give it back to the church, that they would help us cover a portion of our groceries. So it's like, I was so thankful that they helped us give us a portion of the groceries, but in exchange, we still had to give 10% of that income, which we would have had to spend more than 10% of our door dashing income in order to feed our family. So it was helpful and it did feel like a good trade-off. But for being a multi-billion-dollar industry, the amount of people who go without eating so that they can pay their tithing, or people who like walk miles and miles and miles to church so that they can have their regular church attendance and be blessed by God and everything, and give everything that they have in a way that is like a sacrifice to their family. That's hard. But in all of its defense, the prompt is the Mormon Church has done good in the world, and I would step forward. I do believe that they've done good. They are constantly doing good, so I would step forward.
Agreeers, please step forward.
We do a lot of humanitarian aid. We give wheelchairs out to people in like third world nations. There's a lot of good we do. I would agree that I would also say, there's some things that other religions do better than us. Mm-hmm. The LDS Church does a great job helping out those who are needy.
I think the church does do a lot of great humanitarian work, and a lot of the time growing up, it was like, what can we do for our neighborhood? What can we do for our church community? What can we do for our fellow ward members? They just preach a lot of service qualities, which is great. On the other hand, I think that, I hate to say they could do more, and that's the negative, but like with all of the money that they inherit from tithing, the Mormon Church requires its members give 10% of their income before taxes to the Mormon Church, and then they utilize that money to do things, around the world, like build malls. But I think that they could do more with the money they're doing. Yes, they do a lot of good, but I think they could do even more good if they utilize that money better.
When she says like build malls, like City Creek Mall in Salt Lake City, Utah was built by them, so they'll use a lot of the money that it gets from its members to try and continue to get revenue. So building a mall continues to bring them revenue. They just had like a big scandal that happened where they found out that they were like hiding a bunch of money in shell companies to get, more tax breaks and stuff, which anyway, that could turn into a whole nother conversation. But stuff like that, I think the tithing money is used in a lot of ways that are, it's not fully transparent with all of its members. A lot of members don't care. They're like, whatever you want to do with my money to build up the house of God and, to assist us during the second coming, whatever. And then there's a lot of people who find out what's being done with the money and they're like, whoa, did not know that. I disagree. A lot of tithing money was used to go to make like donations to, you know, anti-gay like charities and things like that. So, carry on.
When I personally had a surgery, and I had random members that I probably haven't even met from my church. They were leaving me gifts, they were leaving me notes, they were leaving me cards. Just get well soon. Nothing huge, but it's just the thought that counts. And I didn't even have family that would leave me things like that. They're just very thoughtful people, and they're always thinking of the next guy.
For especially the ex-Mormons, would you guys say it's more of a net positive or a net negative?
For me, it's going to be more of a net positive. And I know that's kind of surprising to probably a lot of people here. I left the Mormon church just a few years ago because it didn't make me personally happy. I get to kind of sit here today in a little bit of a happy position, just knowing that like I don't really feel like I have a lot of religious trauma to speak of about my experience in the Mormon church. I feel like when I went on my mission and I was called to Houston, Texas, I got to meet some amazing people, and the things that I taught in Preach My Gospel that spoke to me, that I still know to this day are true, are all of the things that I still keep in my life, that I hold dear, that I associate, the friends that I have, the family that I keep, just all the connections that I have are within those truths that I hold dear. So for me, I'm gonna go ahead and just say it's a net positive for me, and I'm really thankful for that.
When I was in middle school, my parents got divorced, and I think my life could have gone in a lot of directions at that point. And I remember one of my Mormon church leaders has pulled me aside and he said, "John, you're a star." And so many good Mormon adult leaders rallied around me, supported me, and provided me with an amazing youth experience. And then I went on to serve a mission in Guatemala. I learned a foreign language. I spent 2 years in a developing country. And then just in my psychology training, people need identity, meaning, purpose, morality, a sense of spirituality, resolution about the afterlife, and friends and community. And one of the things that I regret is I've spent so much time trying to create secular community after being kicked out of the Mormon church, and I have not been able to do anything like what the Mormon church has been able to do. So until secular people are able to create communities that provide all those things to the secular people, I think religions like the Mormon church are going to continue to have an important place.
Yeah, I could say that a lot of the opportunities that I experienced, a lot of the mentors, a lot of the people that helped the village that raised me was within my church experience. And so my mission, I had positive experiences. I met a lot of incredible people, built a lot of good connections, but I don't know that, I know, yeah, there's humanitarian stuff, but I don't know if you can weigh that to the youth suicide in the LGBTQ community. I don't know if we can weigh that. It's just hard to weigh those things out of like, is the good better than the negative because of the spiritual trauma that it does cost, the emotional damage it does within families, within individuals. So I don't know that I could actually say which it does more of because the damage is so severe, but I know that there are positive experiences.
I can't have conversations like this with my family. It's not a way we speak with each other. We can't have this open dialogue of what we disagree about. And, maybe other families are different, but my family is very, very Mormon in that way, where very reactive and uncomfortable topics don't go well. And if I want to talk about the history or people of LGBTQ, it's not a conversation I can have. So having this conversation with all of you today almost was like a substitute for that.
So you need him to come to like family dinner?
Yes, that's like, that'd be great.
I'm not cheap. Well, so that concludes our episode of Mormons versus Ex-Mormons. If you guys want to embrace, shake hands, hug, whatever you guys need to do.
Okay, so yeah, that was Mormons versus Ex-Mormons on middle ground. I don't think I have anything else to add. Hopefully what I was able to add was something that some of you were able to connect with and agree with. And if not, comment below, disagree away. I want us to all be able to learn from each other and hear everybody's experiences and opinions, and let's just like bounce stuff off of each other. And hopefully you enjoyed that video. If you missed part 1, don't forget to head over to my channel and watch that. I'll also put it in the description box below. If you're not subscribed already, please don't forget to do so and leave a thumbs up. It helps my channel more than you know. And I will see you in my next video, guys. Thank you so much. Bye.